There's a moment right before everything changes. A moment so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. I was sitting in that chair, under those lights, with 200 strangers staring at me, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment they finally see what I really am. What I didn't expect was that I'd be the one doing the shocking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to know where I started. You need to know what they said about me, what this whole town said, before any of that could matter. My name is Sarah Calloway. I'm 34 years old. I live in Maplewood, Ohio. Population 6,000, give or take a few people who leave and never look back. I was born here, grew up here. My mama raised me in a yellow house on Elm Street with a screen door that never shut right. I always thought I'd leave someday. Most people in Maplewood say that. Most of them don't go anywhere. In a town like Maplewood, everybody knows your name. Sounds warm, doesn't it? Like something you'd stitch on a pillow. But what nobody tells you is everybody also knows your business, and everybody has an opinion about it whether you asked or not. My daughter Emma is 8 years old. She has red hair and my grandmother's stubborn chin, and she asks more questions before breakfast than most people ask in a week. She is the only thing I have ever done absolutely right. Her daddy left when she was 2, packed a bag one Tuesday like he was going to the hardware store, and just didn't come back. We don't talk about that much. There's nothing left to say about it. I worked mornings at Crawford's Pharmacy on Main Street and evenings at Miller's Diner 4 nights a week. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a crack in the windshield I kept meaning to fix. I bought Emma's school clothes at the thrift store on Maple Avenue, and I cut coupons every Sunday morning while she slept. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't ashamed. I was just surviving, the way most single mothers do, quietly, completely, without applause. The whispers started small. They always do in a town like Maplewood. Diane Mercer was the kind of woman who smiled at your face and talked about you the second you turned away. She ran the PTA like it was her own small country, and she had decided somewhere along the line that I was not the right kind of person. I'm not sure what I did to earn that. I think sometimes people just choose someone to look down on, and it gives them something to do. Her best friend, Karen Pullman, owned the hair salon on Main Street. If Diane was the source of the gossip, Karen was the distribution system. You could tell Karen Pullman something on a Monday, and by Wednesday it had reached the church ladies, the diner counter crowd, and the school pickup line, with 3 new details added. Then there was Todd Briggs. He ran the car dealership out on Route 9 and held court at Miller's Diner every morning like he was running for mayor of something. Loud man. Very certain about everything, the kind of certain that doesn't require any evidence. One afternoon, I was picking Emma up from school, and I heard Diane say to Karen, not even trying to lower her voice, "I just don't know how she expects to raise that little girl properly, working nights at a diner. What kind of example is that for a child?" I kept walking. I smiled at Emma. I buckled her seatbelt. I did not cry until I got to the end of the street. But that was just the beginning. When people can't explain you, they invent an explanation. And the one they invented for me was not kind. Todd Briggs told half the men at his poker night that I was clearly hiding something. Karen put it around the salon that I'd been seen driving a car that didn't match what she makes at the diner. Diane told the church committee she was concerned. And in Maplewood, when Diane Mercer says she's concerned about you, it means she's been talking about you to everyone who will listen. They thought I was gambling or lying about my finances to get assistance I didn't qualify for. Some people whispered I was seeing someone from out of town, and that's where the money went. Nobody stopped to think that maybe a woman working 2 jobs and raising a child alone was just exactly that, a woman working 2 jobs and raising a child alone. But the day that changed something in me, the day I went from hurt to something harder and quieter, was the day Emma came home from school and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Mama, Jessie said her mom said you're a liar." 8 years old, red hair, grandmother's chin, looking at me with those serious eyes, waiting for me to explain the world. I sat down next to her. I told her that sometimes people say things that aren't true, and that it doesn't make them true. I told her that what matters is what we know about ourselves. She nodded like she understood. Then she went and did her homework. I sat at that table for a long time after she went to bed. Now, here's where I have to tell you something. Something I hadn't told anyone in Maplewood. Barely a soul, in fact. 3 years before all of this, I got a phone call on a Wednesday morning while I was restocking cold medicine at the pharmacy. It was a lawyer from Seattle. He told me that my Uncle Gerald had passed away. Uncle Gerald was my mother's older brother. He left Maplewood decades before I was born and built a life out west that none of us were really part of. He came to my mother's funeral, shook my hand, said, "You have her eyes," and drove away. I didn't think about him much after that. We weren't close. We weren't anything, really. The lawyer told me Gerald had never married, had no children, had very few people he stayed close to, and he had left his entire estate to me. The estate was worth $4.2 million. I sat down on the floor of the pharmacy storage room with the phone in my hand, and I stayed there for a while. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was something more like fear. Because I had watched money move through this town my whole life. I had watched it make people mean to each other, make them suspicious, make them feel entitled to things they hadn't earned. And I had a daughter to raise, a daughter who at that point was 5 years old and already asking hard questions and paying attention to everything. I made a decision that day. I would not touch the money. Not yet. Not until I figured out what I actually wanted to do with it, and why, and whether I could do it without it changing who Emma was going to become. I found a financial advisor in Columbus, a man named David Chen. Quiet and careful and exactly the kind of person you want handling something like this. I drove 2 hours each way to meet him on my days off while Emma was at my neighbor's house. I told no one in Maplewood. No one. Over the next 3 years, I kept working. I kept buying Emma's clothes at the thrift store. I kept driving the Civic with the cracked windshield. I kept cutting coupons on Sunday mornings, not because I had to, because I had decided that Emma was going to grow up knowing that her mother worked for everything, that she was not handed a life, that she built one. David and I set up a trust in Emma's name, college, a home, a foundation she could stand on when she was grown. She doesn't know it exists. She still thinks we clip coupons because we have to. She still does her homework at the kitchen table and says yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and has never in her life expected something for nothing. That is not an accident. That was a choice I made every single day. And then there was what I did with the rest. You know that tutoring center on Main Street, the one that opened about 6 months ago in that old, empty building the town had been arguing about for years? The one Diane Mercer posted about on her Facebook page as an example of community coming together. I paid for that. I gutted that building. I hired those tutors. I covered the first 2 years of operating costs under a holding company name because I didn't want anyone to know. It wasn't about recognition. It was about those kids. A lot of them growing up exactly like Emma, with mothers exactly like me, having somewhere to go after school that was safe and warm and took them seriously. Diane Mercer posted about it on Facebook and said it was so wonderful to see this community finally stepping up. I didn't say a word. I got a letter in October, hand-addressed, Columbus postmark. I almost threw it away. The letter was from a production team for a show called Hidden Hearts, a daytime program out of Columbus hosted by a woman named Patricia Wynn. The show did a regular segment called The Untold Story, where they sat down with ordinary people who were carrying extraordinary things quietly. Someone had nominated me. I found out later it was David. He had watched me for 3 years, driving 2 hours each way, working 2 jobs, saying nothing to no one, and he had decided, without telling me, that the world should hear it. I almost said no. I sat with that letter for 2 weeks, read it so many times the paper went soft at the folds. I am a private person. I had kept this secret carefully. The last thing I wanted was a camera and a studio audience and whatever came after. But then Emma came home one Friday and told me a boy in her class had called me the diner lady, like it was something to be ashamed of. And she didn't say it like it hurt her. She said it like she was confused, like she couldn't understand why that would be an insult. I called Patricia Wynn's producer the next morning. What I didn't know, what they arranged without telling me, was that Diane Mercer, Karen Pullman, and Todd Briggs had also been invited, not as targets, just as community members who know Sarah. They were told the show wanted their perspective. That was technically true. Patricia Wynn is a very precise woman. Diane got her hair done the morning of taping. I know because Karen told someone who eventually told me. Diane thought she was being given a platform. She drove to Columbus in her good coat, ready to perform. I wore my blue blouse, the one I bought for my mother's funeral and had worn exactly twice since. I did my own hair. I wasn't nervous exactly. I felt the way the sky feels right before a storm, completely still but full of something. Patricia Wynn is not what you expect from a television host. She's not loud, she doesn't rush. She sat across from me and looked at me like she actually wanted to know the answer before she asked the question. I appreciated that. She asked me to tell my story, so I told it plainly. The pharmacy, the diner, the civic, the coupons, Emma. The years of keeping my head down and doing what needed doing. Then Patricia Wynn asked me, on camera, in front of everyone, "Sarah, people in your town have said some hard things about you. How does that feel?" I looked right at the camera. I said, "It used to hurt. Now it just makes me tired." Then Diane Mercer was given a microphone from the audience. She leaned into it with her most sorrowful expression, the one she saves for when she wants to seem like she cares. She talked about concern for Emma. She talked about choices. She suggested, very gently, very publicly, that a good mother perhaps wouldn't struggle this way. She smiled at the camera when she finished. She thought she was winning. Patricia Wynn nodded slowly. Then she reached beneath her desk and produced a folder. "That's so interesting," Patricia said, "that you mention the child, because Sarah has been doing something for the children of Maplewood that I think you might not be aware of." And then she laid it out, document by document, photo by photo on the screen behind me. The inheritance, the 3 years untouched, the trust in Emma's name, the holding company, the 3 commercial buildings, renovated and repurposed, the tutoring center, the full cost breakdown, the number of students served, a letter from one mother whose daughter had gone from failing 3rd grade to reading above her level in 4 months, and at the very end, a donation made quietly, anonymously, the previous year to Maplewood Elementary's lunch program, which had cut 47 children's accounts for unpaid balances. I heard the audience before I saw them, a sound like a slow wave, a long collective breath that turned into something else. Patricia looked at me and asked why. Why the secrecy? Why keep working 2 jobs? Why say nothing? And I said what I had never said out loud to anyone, not even David, not even myself in the mirror. Because I didn't want Emma to grow up thinking she was better than anybody else, and I didn't want this town to like me because of a number in a bank account. If they couldn't be decent to me when I was carrying grocery bags and punching a clock, then the money wouldn't fix that. It would just cover it up. The camera found Diane Mercer. She still had the microphone in her hand. Her mouth was open slightly. Karen was staring at the floor. Todd Briggs, for what I believe was the first time in his adult life, had absolutely nothing to say. Diane Mercer, who had an opinion about everything and everyone in Maplewood for as long as I could remember, did not say a single word. The clip went viral. I had 700 voicemails by the following Tuesday, and I didn't listen to most of them. Diane sent a handwritten letter of apology about 2 weeks later. 3 pages, very neat handwriting. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I'm not sure what I'll do with it eventually. Maybe nothing. Maybe that's enough. The tutoring center now has a 2-year wait list. Emma still doesn't know about the money, and I intend to keep it that way for a little while longer. She still does her homework at the kitchen table. She still says, "Yes, ma'am." Last week, she saved up her allowance to buy her best friend a birthday present, and she wrapped it herself with paper she cut from a brown grocery bag. I still drive the Civic. The windshield is still cracked. I keep meaning to fix it. People ask me, "Did you feel vindicated? Did it feel good?" Honestly, what I felt was tired. A good kind of tired. Like after a long run. Like your body finally knows it can stop. Emma asked me, the day after the show aired, why everyone at school was being so nice to her all of a sudden. I told her people are just like that sometimes, that they surprise you. She thought about it for a second. Then she said, "I think I liked it better when it was just us." Smart kid. Gets it from her grandmother. I used to think the hardest thing was being poor. Then I thought it was being alone. Then being talked about. But the hardest thing, the thing nobody warns you about, is staying yourself when the world keeps trying to tell you who you are. I stayed. Not because I was strong every single day. Some days I was just stubborn. Some days I was just too tired to give them the satisfaction. But Emma watched me stay, and she is going to remember that. Long after she knows about the money, long after the tutoring center has a proper name above the door, long after that apology letter has gone yellow in the drawer, she is going to remember that her mother stood up straight. And that is enough. That has always been enough.